So a personal experience of what is happening on this night is at the very essence of what Pesach is. This is said early on in the Seder. There's a wonderful paragraph there. It says, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. Said in Hebrew for those who want to practice their Hebrew, and I'll say it in English. In every single generation, a person is required to look at himself as he himself went out of Egypt. The personal dimension is essential, of course, in Pesach, but Pesach being the seed of all Judaism, the beginning of our experience as a nation that is going to attempt to live a godly life, guided by the commandments and fulfilling the commandments of the Torah. So, hence, the lessons we learn in Pesach apply to all of the Torah. And point number one is, this is not a passive experience. This is not something which we can live vicariously or watch third parties do and say, hey, I love Judaism. You need to do it yourself. You need to experience yourself. If you don't, there's a very big problem. You're going to get bored. The Khatam Sofer explains the many psukim that say, that which I commanded you today. Why today? And Rashi always says, it should be like a fresh, something you just got now. People don't like old things. It's human nature. When the Torah becomes perceived as something that we are overly familiar with, we then look for other systems which are foreign to our values as Jews. And on the other hand, the antidote to assimilation and everything else is freshness. Always trying to find something new. There's only one way to achieve freshness, only one way to find new things, which is continue studying. We'll always find new things. As the Pirkei Avot says, hafachba, keep turning over. Everything is there. And so we have to relive this experience. And now I will come to the idea that I hope to say also tomorrow in synagogue, kind of a quasi easier style of a drasha, of an analysis for Shabbat Hagadol. And it ties together all of these themes, and particularly the theme of reliving personally the Exodus story. And here it is. We all know what brachot are, blessings. There's different kinds of blessings. We say blessings on food or things that we get benefit from to thank God for wine, grapes, bread, chocolate, fish, eggs, whatever it is. We thank God for certain experiences and difficulties that we go through, like Hagomel, people who travel on a ship, people who are freed from prison, people who recovered from illness. There's a third category. They're called Birkat HaMitzvot. We thank God for giving us this incredible, immeasurable opportunity to fulfill His commandments. We say in each of these instances, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with His commandments and commanded us to fill in the blank. Listen to the shofar, hold the lulav, sit in the sukkah, light Shabbat candles, put on tefillin, and so on and so forth. And this is really the preparation. We don't just do this thing. It requires a blessing. We have to draw down the energy and strength and joy into the mitzvah, which you do for the blessing. Now, there are some notable exceptions to this rule. For example, we don't say a blessing when we give charity, for example. Tzedakah is definitely a mitzvah. So there are some parameters that are described, such as a blessing would be made only when the mitzvah is completed at the time that you are, more or less the time you're saying the blessing. Tzedakah is a charitable act, is a commandment which doesn't have a specific shiur. We know that doesn't mean, it doesn't have a specific limit. Oh, I give it $10, I get it. Yeah, it doesn't mean you can always give more. But there is a mitzvah, curiously, which does not seem to fit into these parameters, and yet we find that we do not say a blessing on it. and that is the recitation of the Haggadah. The recitation of the Haggadah is the embodiment of the mitzvah, which is V'higadata lebincha. There'll come a time your son will ask you, what is this all about, in various forms, and you should tell him. Actually, we know that it happens this time. 4 times in the Torah it's mentioned. That is where the idea of the 4 different kinds of sons is derived from. But generally speaking, V'higadata, you should tell it to your sons. And so the so-called Ba'alei Haggadah, the authors of the Haggadah, which is a Mishnaic work, have incorporated into the Haggadah everything essential to fulfill the mitzvah of telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And we start it, we read it, we finish it. And therefore, it's clearly a biblical mitzvah. It would have made sense that on this mitzvah we make a blessing. For example, blessed are you, the Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to talk about the Exodus from Egypt. And yet, those of you who have been through the Haggadah know that there is no such blessing. And there is a question raised in a variety of commentaries. Why not? So, I'd like to share with you a few short suggestions that have been made throughout the generations. One suggestion is that in the Kiddush we say Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, that the very celebration of the holiday is a commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. So we make mention of Yetziat Mitzrayim in the Kiddush. The recitation of Kiddush is a blessing, and hence there is a blessing before the recitation of the Haggadah, which makes mention of the commandment, because it is a commandment to remember going out of Egypt. Now, the remembrance of going out of Egypt is a commandment every single day. It is true that talking about it is a slightly elevated form of that, but more or less, this is one approach. There's another interesting solution that I saw to this today, which is that the discussion of the Exodus is, in fact, in the category of Torah study. Torah study is an ongoing obligation, which happens every single day. We have to make a blessing on it each morning. It was commanded us to study the Torah, or regarding studying the Torah, or to involve ourselves in studying of the Torah. And therefore, it is only a specific dimension of that we limit ourselves, because of the importance of the Exodus, to words of Torah that talk about the Exodus. But in fact, it is a subcategory of the general commandment of studying Torah, which we have already blessed in the morning in the prayers. Now, in the Chabad tradition, there is yet another explanation, very classically Chabad style, because extremely simple, but very straightforward and penetrating. It's a tradition going back to the Baal Tanya, the author of the Tanya, the Admor HaZaken, as he's called, the Shner Zaman of Liadi. And he said, illustrated it. For example, a blessing is also a commandment. It's a rabbinic commandment, but it's a commandment. Before we make a blessing, we don't say another blessing. He who has sanctified us with the commandments commanded us to make a blessing. Why? Because this itself is a blessing. You don't make a blessing, another blessing. So, commandments which are fulfilled through words, through utterance, which in their general character are also like a blessing, because the idea is to express praise, is already like saying a bracha, and hence we don't say a bracha on a bracha. For example, we wash for bread and we have a meal, we say the Birkat HaMazon, to bless after we eat. Before we eat. After we eat is also a commandment, but we don't make a blessing on it, because this is the blessing. And so too explains Rabbi Shner Zaman of Liadi that the Haggadah is itself like a blessing. It is words of praise, and hence does not have to be prefaced by another blessing. Now I'd like to come back to our theme of what it means to personally relive the Haggadah. And come to explanation of the Chatam Sofer, which brings this point home. Chatam Sofer points out a different exception to the rule. Whenever for some reason the person is not fit to say the blessing before the mitzvah is fulfilled, so he doesn't say the mitzvah, the blessing before, he says it afterwards. Generally, the rule is that the blessing is made before. For example, common practice now is accepted that we don't say a blessing if our hands are not clean. But washing the hands is also a commandment. What do? We say the blessing, but we wash the hands first, and afterwards we say the blessing. It's extenuating circumstance. Let's give another example. It's a commandment, a mitzvah for a person who is converting to Judaism to immerse him or herself in a mikveh. You should say a blessing. Can he say a blessing beforehand? No, because the blessing says, Asher Kedishanu, who has sanctified us with the commandment and commanded us too. But before the person is Jewish, he doesn't have that commandment. These are commandments for the children of Israel. What does he or she do? He immerses himself and says the blessing afterwards. The Chatam Sofer says, we are now reliving the Exodus. It is the taking us out of Egypt that has transformed us into a nation. And therefore, once again, we are slaves in Egypt when we start the Seder. And as such, we cannot say the blessing because our nation has not yet been born. And therefore, we say the Haggadah. By the time we get to the end of the story, we have already passed the transformation. We are now a Jewish nation who is subject to the commandments of the Almighty, and therefore in the middle there is that very beautiful blessing, Asher Ge'elanu, who has redeemed us. A blessing about being redeemed from Egypt. So we see, from the answer to the Chatam Sofer, the idea that we do indeed make a blessing, it is made later, because this brings out the fact how we are truly reliving the Exodus from Egypt in our own days.